When you connect, bridge the gaps, you have the opportunity of sharing different perspectives. That's when a team can innovate. They can do better. They can do different things. You have to budget time for building relationships. 1 minute at the beginning of the meeting, just looking at the people in the room, say good morning. When you finish the meeting, you do the same.
Hello and welcome to Brazil is Not for Beginners. Today I have a special guest, Denise Coronha Lima. Denise is based in Rio, where she is the founder of Rio Total Consulting, where she focuses on corporate consulting, intercultural coaching. In all transparency, Denise, who was my Portuguese teacher for many, many years, but has moved on to more intercultural coaching and consulting. And I'm really excited to chat with you today, Denise. Thank you so much for joining.
Oh, thank you, Isaac. I'm very happy to be here.
I've always enjoyed our classes. We haven't been doing them for the last couple of years since I live here and my Portuguese is pretty decent. I was also a poor founder and so couldn't afford to pay for lessons. But you were my tutor, shall we say, for maybe 6 years, I think. And we always had great conversations. And I saw as you moved from focusing more on Portuguese teaching and tutoring into this cross-cultural collaboration work. And I'm really interested to go deeper, especially to hear some of the stories from the last few years when we haven't been in as close contact. So really, really excited for this chat. But maybe before we get into the specifics of what you've seen in this space, maybe you could share a little bit about yourself and how you came to this.
So I started in my early 20s teaching Portuguese for foreigners, multinationals, basically, on a daily basis. Then I moved on, and now I've been since 2005 helping Brazilian professionals and also foreigners representing more than 50 different nationalities develop this super skill, which is the intercultural, cultural intelligence. With this skill, anyone can learn. You can communicate effectively and work effectively with people from different cultures. So that's what I've been doing lately.
Very cool. How did you end up tutoring, if I can ask, before you found this work? So you said you started in your early 20s. What made you interested initially in teaching foreigners Portuguese?
It was just an opportunity. I didn't have a plan, so I was looking for a job. So I started teaching Portuguese for foreigners. I was very curious. I was very disciplined. So the students, they liked, they enjoyed the experience with the classes. They were learning. They always learned very quickly. And the thing, Isaac, is that I started having daily cultural shocks. So the teaching was going very well, okay? And then every day I would have a different cultural shock. And then I decided that I was going to be the student, a secret student. So I started learning from Americans, Swiss consuls, South Africans, British people, from all of them. Okay, I was there just observing and asking. I was very young. So I think they were interested in telling me about their culture, and we would exchange this cultural knowledge. So soon I understood that language was not enough. I was helping to overcome the language barrier, but it was not enough. There was another barrier, invisible barrier, the cultural barrier. So in the beginning, I did it by observation, by learning. I read a lot, but later on, so I became a cross-cultural consultant and qualified coach, intercultural coach. And lately I've been doing that based on this skill, on the framework of the intercultural, or better saying, cultural intelligence.
That makes a lot of sense. And when we would do our classes, we always had a lesson plan and it always left the lesson plan and talked about other things, or we would talk about subjects, not just kind of getting the grammar right, but understanding the context and understanding things. And I think even with language, there's a piece of understanding the nuance of the language. I'm fluent in Portuguese and I speak it, but I think there's levels of fluency. So I still speak it like an American, if that makes sense. And I think you and I would talk about that. When I structure a phrase, I might do it in an English way. So it makes sense and everybody understands me, but it's not the way that necessarily a Brazilian would say it. Or I don't have the context of the history of something. So I took my son and daughter to Parque da Mônica over the weekend. And, it didn't mean anything to me because I didn't grow up with Turma da Mônica. But there's other things around it. And so I think that even in our Portuguese classes, you tried to bring some of that context. And I was really excited as you moved into this cross-cultural collaboration because I could see that you were excited about it. And you would always tell me stories about you'd never name who the students were or what was going on, but dealing with the cultural shocks and the impacts. And I think just being curious about what they were experiencing as foreigners in Brazil. That was very cool. So moving along here, you mentioned that you kind of started focusing on it maybe a little bit organically as you had your culture shocks, but was there a moment that really drove this interest in I'm going to slowly stop teaching just Portuguese and focus more on this other aspect?
Yes, there was this American company that I would go very often, almost daily, to teach different people. And then I realized that there were two separate bubbles. I would interact and deal and work with the bubble of the expatriates, and but I could see in the background or on the side the bubble of Brazilians. So they would interact and work together. So they would engage up to a certain level, but not really deep. And they didn't really understand each other. So that's when I decided that's what I want to do. I want to help them. I want to bridge the gap, the cultural gap. So companies usually provide trainings and coaching for the foreigners coming. I also do for Brazilians leaving Brazil. But nowadays, I'm really interested in teaching and helping more and more Brazilians to become culturally aware, to have an edge.
Going a little bit deeper, you mentioned cross cultural intelligence. I think that was the phrase you used. So, can you talk a little bit about that and giving people that edge and how you think about that?
The thing is, people come here or Brazilians go abroad, or even if you don't move, so you're working virtually in a cross cultural or in a multicultural team, you have your business plan, you have your technical knowledge, you're good at what you do, but then you are dealing with people that see things different from you. They do things differently, so they have different values. So, with cultural intelligence, we start by creating a knowledge base, understanding the context. For example, if people come to Brazil, they're coming here, so they have to understand the Brazilian context, the geography, the history, important facts, or how people think, the values. So we have this knowledge base. Otherwise, you have time and space, right? So you have to place yourself, where am I standing? Or even if you are online, what's this context that I'm environment that I'm working with? So first, cultural intelligence, we have four dimensions: motivation, their driver, why are they doing it, and then knowledge, strategies, and then action. So we create this knowledge base. Of course, I get to know my client, why they're doing it, their motivations, and then we have this knowledge base, and then we move to the strategies. And usually, the crucial areas, the most important areas that we have to deal with, no matter what culture we're talking about or cultures are involved, are building relationships and build trust.
Yes, absolutely. Those are themes that we've talked about a few times on this podcast with folks around how to bridge the gaps to do that. So, going a little bit deeper, what are the most common areas that you tend to focus on within that? How do you begin to build that trust, build that knowledge, bridge those gaps? Where are the main areas that you focus on, and where are the issues and challenges that kind of arise as you tend to do that?
Engaging is the biggest challenge. To engage, you have to understand people. So you have to understand the context, the values. For example, I work with this beautiful company, the most beautiful office I have ever been, and the values are all printed on a glass wall. So it looks wonderful. Okay, so you see, they are direct, they are open, they're beautiful. But Isaac, just taking one example, the value, openness, being open, it means different things for foreigners and for Brazilians. For them, being open is to be able to speak freely, to be candid, honest. For Brazilian, being open is to be able to talk to anyone, to be friendly. So they say that Brazilians are not open because we don't speak directly. And we think they're not open. They don't establish eye contact usually. So let me tell you two things before we go on. When we talk about cultures, we are talking general terms because people are different. And secondly, there's no right or wrong. It's just different. And that's the beauty of it. When you connect, bridge the gaps, so you have the opportunity of sharing different perspectives. That's when a team can innovate. They can do better. They can do different things. And that's why people say that people are the most important asset that companies have. And it's true. Once they engage and they connect, and you mentioned the word collaboration. It's interesting that if you look at the word collaboration, labor is inside the word collaboration. And it's collaboration. So it's co working, it's working together.
One of my favorite quotes, and I'm going to butcher it here, but I think something along the lines of the expert only sees a few ways and the beginner sees all the ways, or something like that. But there's this idea of maintaining a beginner's mindset because you're more open to different things, as opposed to when you are an expert in something, then you know how it has to be done. And so it's hard for you to think outside the box because that must be wrong and you're less open to these other ideas.
Sometimes they don't think it's wrong, but it's unfamiliar. So people say no or they shut themselves to things that are unfamiliar. Maybe because there's so much uncertainty in the world and you want to have some certainty at work. But the one thing that we can be sure of is that we are all humans, and humans crave relationships in different ways. For example, working with Norwegians during the working hours, they really focus on what they're doing. So they leave all the conversation, meeting people, building relationships outside. They think that's the best way to work. And after work, so they engage with their friends and family, they have fun. But in Brazil, we have a very fine line separating, or we don't have this fine line. We don't separate personal life and professional life. Going to work is still your life. So we talk. It's very interesting going to an office here where you see Scandinavians working because I tell sometimes we are sitting or talking in a room with a closed door and we can hear people laughing outside. And we talk about, do you hear that? Would you hear that in your country? No, you have to adjust. And even if you work at a company where Brazilians, a foreign company, multinational, where Brazilians are used to the company culture, which in many ways reflect the national culture, those people, those professionals who are new here, they're going to be talking and dealing and having meetings with suppliers, with Brazilian authorities. You have this big ecosystem. So you have to be prepared for the ecosystem. That's what we do. I think your question was, how do I do it? I help them to become more familiar with the country. We talk, I ask them questions and anticipate, think of aspects of Brazil they had never thought about. It was not under their radar yet. And then we talk about the values, for example, communication and relationship. Here's always people first, relationship first. So we start a meeting, you have to engage, okay? At least greet people.
Yeah. You need a few minutes to ask how the weekend was. How are their kids?
I think you don't even have to go there, but just at least establish eye contact. Establish eye contact. Say good morning looking at them. There is this American that I follow him on LinkedIn, Tim Sanders, and he says budget time. He budget times for other things, but I took the expression you have to budget time for building relationships. 1 minute at the beginning of the meeting, just looking at the people in the room, say good morning, and then just look again. When you finish the meeting, you do the same. So we talk about the values and then how the values, what behaviors, what attitudes will reflect those values in Brazil or when I'm with Brazilians in the other culture, the foreign culture. So we thought that's how we do it.
It all comes down to this kind of knowledge base, right? And I think that's to some degree what I'm trying to do here is give people a little bit of knowledge about Brazil so that when they come, they have a little bit more of an understanding of how things work, or if they work here, that they feel more comfortable. What else do you focus on in that knowledge base? Are there historical facts that like these are things that people need to understand? What is that like baseline that you try to set with people on the trust building and the other thing, but also on kind of the cultural and historical aspects?
So I think one very important point is to understand the culture. Culture represents the echoes of our past. So that's why we need this context, because if you understand the past, you see the echoes. And in my experience, it has happened to me and I see happening to other people, is that when you understand things about the past, you understand what you see in the present and you understand the whys. And I believe that if you understand the why, you make peace with the differences. You say, oh, that's why. You start reacting with the behaviors and the social norms that you see because you know why. We don't need to be stuck there in the past, okay? But it's just the echoes of the past. And then one client, she was Chinese. She said, oh, Denise, I would say instead of the echoes of the past, the burden of the past. I remember once I had groups of Brazilians and also groups of foreigners, but separately. So with the groups of Brazilians, I compared how America started with the pilgrims and the history of Brazil, how we started. It was so obvious that we had different beginnings as countries. So the way we deal with time, it all started there. And the Americans are independent and competitive more than Brazilians. Brazilians are more relationship oriented, as I told you, very creative because we have this lack of resources. We have to be creative. So that's why we talk about the context. So in a way, you start embracing the culture because you understand the whys. And then building communication is easy. I'd like to mention, instead of talking about the relationship, I want to give you a very simple example I share with my clients. If you want to build relationship with Brazilians, what do you do? As I told you, respect the rituals, how you start a meeting and finish a meeting, always greeting people. Very briefly, you don't need to take long, but do it. Don't never ignore people. And then use first names. Just use first names. For example, if I go to a meeting and I see you, I say, Bom dia. Okay, that's good. But what if I say, Bom dia, Isaac?
It opens up a little bit more the informality, right?
Yes, Zach, we work better. We open up. Remember being open. We open up when we start connecting as people. And so if you say, Bom dia, Denise, to me, I say, oh, he knows me. He sees me. You see, all this. Of course, when I talk, Brazilians don't talk about it. I had never read it in a book. I just realized that in my coaching sessions, I would tell the guy, oh Peter, yes, Peter, well, Peter. And they never heard my name. They never said my name. I said, oh, that's the difference. So I started telling people again and again, so use first names. And it works.
Yeah, it helps to establish that rapport and, like you said, begin to build that level of trust that you need for people here. I think, and we'll get into a little bit as we go forward. I think, Brazilian work environments sometimes are very hierarchical. And so breaking down that barrier and being able to give people permission to take ownership, you need to break down that barrier and let them know that you see them and respect them and they're valued in what they can do. I really like that example.
So, Isaac, before we talk about trust, you mentioned ownership. So I remember I gave a workshop at an American company here. And so I met with the Brazilian team, okay? And then my client, the American, he was there attending the meeting. And then there was the slide with words in English that Brazilians don't get, that we need to be familiar with. And one of them was ownership. So feedback, ownership, deadline, and accountability. And when he saw the slide, he started nodding and he was happy to see the slide. See? So ownership, that's very difficult. Not difficult, but unfamiliar. It's still unfamiliar to many Brazilians.
Yeah, I think it's just the different product of the work environment. Like you said, I think it's echoes of the past or the burden of the past, depending on how you want to think about it. But you mentioned trust there. So I don't know if there's any examples of trust building that you would highlight. I mean, any of these stories are always great. So more anecdotes are better. I think that helps with people to understand the context of what you're meaning.
I will tell you something about trust that I think is really important. And I have an example that came not really related to trust that I'll share with you. So, first, what I see the big thing about building trust is that, for example, Americans or Europeans in general, and so you build trust based on people's competency or reliability. People are reliable, so you trust them. And then you may be interested in building a relationship. The relationship may grow from there. But with Brazilians, we start building trust based on relationships. And that's why saying the first name, that's why greeting people. As you build a relationship, we become more trustworthy because we open up and then we want to do the best for that person who knows me. And so it's a different order. Both things are important. Being reliable, sorry, being reliable, Brazilians interrupt, being reliable and building relationships. But the thing is, people come here and they're very rational and they tell you what they want, how they want, what they want to be done, how, by when, and they close the agenda of the meeting. And the president says, oh my God, who's this guy? How can I do a good job for him? So we need this type of information, or not everyone, but it helps. It helps. And then as I know what you expect of me and I feel more comfortable with you, so I'll give you my best. Of course, Brazilians are talented and professional, but as I told you, we have this language barrier and the cultural barriers. Once we bridge those gaps, overcome those barriers, everything becomes easier. And one example I wanted to give you, I remember this lady at the end of a workshop. She just stood up and shared an example with the group. She said that one day her boss came to her and told her that they were going to have two visitors from the United States. And these two people were going to spend the day at I think it was a factory or something. And she was supposed to spend the day with them at the company. And it was important that he said, I want them to like it. They have to like the experience, to have a good experience. Full stop. They didn't say how. She had to figure it out. And then she prepared herself. She said that she prepared herself. And you know what she did differently? So she thought, so I'm going to spend the day with these two Americans, a guy and a lady. What she did, Isaac, was to create space. She realized that Brazilians, we talk more, we interact more. So she paused more. She created more moments of silence. She said that when they went for lunch, she talked less. For us, it's totally unfamiliar, totally awkward, but she did it differently. She did it intentionally. That's the beauty of it. And when they were visiting the facility, she asked them, would you like me to go with you or not? She said, no, no, it's okay. We can figure it out. We can go alone. And she let them go. She created space. It was a very successful visit. They enjoyed it. But, that's the cultural intelligence. So you think ahead, and that's the kind of plan that you make. What can I do differently so that they feel more comfortable, not me, them? You have more options. You're able to deal with different situations different ways. So there's always personal growth to professional and personal development.
Yeah. And again, I think also the piece is that, we're obviously generalizing and everybody's different. They have their baggage or they have their histories and they're obviously influenced by where they come from, but also understanding the need to adapt and see how people are in the moment is obviously very important. But the tools that you talked about, kind of being intentional, thinking about it, not taking it for granted, make a lot of sense. And obviously building that knowledge base so that you can start off on the right foot. If you're, Brazilian interacting with international people or international people interacting with Brazilians, I imagine that different companies in different industries, different sectors face different challenges, different types of challenges when you're doing this type of cross-cultural work. So I imagine if you're based in Rio, oil and gas is a big industry. So I imagine dealing with oil and gas, workers is going to be very different than dealing with an entertainment company or some other type of multinational that's kind of, a tech company or something like that. So can you speak a little bit to some of those differences by industry and how you've managed those? And I imagine it also factors into kind of, for lack of a better word, the class of the people, right? So if you're working at again, an oil and a gas company, maybe you're going to be dealing with more traditional workers who are, maybe lower income or have a lower formal education than maybe some of the people where you're dealing at a tech company and everybody's got a master's degree or trained in computer engineering or something like that.
Yeah, you reminded me of when I gave many, many workshops to teams. So they were working on oil rigs. So I met Americans coming from, I don't know, Mississippi. I don't know. And I could hardly understand their English. What I learned there. So I only started giving them the workshops because the company realized that the lack of cultural understanding or having cultural understanding was a matter of life or death. Literally, they only invested in workshops when there were, I think, one or two accidents on the rig. And something that I learned from Americans that's really valuable is the value of human life. That's great. The way you care for safety and you train people every day. I learned a lot. Remember, I have always been the secret student, the secret learner. And they realized at the company that the accidents were caused by miscommunication and lack of trust. The accident involved a Brazilian and a foreigner. There were many nationalities on the rig. That's different sector or area of the oil industry with very specific needs. And the trainings were very successful. It's like you have a veil. Remember, I said the culture is an invisible barrier, and then you lift, you pull the veil, and then you can see, oh, that's why they're doing it.
That's like putting on glasses for me and you, right? Everything's blurry, and then I put on my glasses and it's clear. Like now it makes sense.
Yeah. So I have talked about different cultures, but talking about sectors. So this oil rig was a very powerful experience. And you know that you're making a contribution. That's a very good feeling that you're really making a contribution. And then the second example that I have seen recently, people coming to Brazil prospecting new business opportunities. And then they have a plan. They're very prepared. They're the very top in their industries. And they come to Brazil to meet Brazilians in different states and they fail. Can you imagine that? And then they tell me, they reach out to me and they say, we didn't have any cultural understanding. These are their words, Isaac. We didn't have any cultural understanding in our venture. Literally those words. And then I coach them on how to engage with Brazilians. And then you know the thing about foreigners, they never have time. They never have it's so they tell me when it was time for them to try a second time to come again to Brazil, they said, oh, we have time. But they told me we only have 3 hours or 4 hours on this specific day, sometimes a Sunday. And then you know how you do it is like walking, walking. So we will walk. I select a place where we can walk. It's as quiet as possible and we go on and we are reflecting together and talking together, interacting. And it's always very customized because it's all about them, about their challenges, and where and how I can help them elevate their communication. So these are two different things. Okay, you helping enabling people that work on oil rigs. Sometimes I think there were 13 nationalities and very top guys, as I said, but cannot engage. And business can't go on if you don't engage. You need people.
Yeah, I think that those are great examples and that all makes sense in terms of I like your analogy to lifting a veil and kind of having clarity of how things are working. We'll get to it. I always ask the question of what does Brazil is not for beginners mean to you? But I think that's the case. It's not for beginners. You may have a plan and then you get here and you see that the plan is not implementable because of various things, right? It's logical, but that doesn't mean that it's going to work. And what works might not necessarily be logical, at least in your perspective, right? It's logical for a Brazilian, but not for an American or not for a Norwegian or not for something like that.
That's why you need to understand the context because you may have the best plan. That's the first step, understanding the environment, the landscape, so that you can adjust, you can refine, you can customize. That's the beauty of it. So that's why we talk about this cultural intelligence. It's a super skill that anyone should learn. Everyone should learn.
I think this thing about logic is something that I've thought a lot about. One of the best books I've read recently was a book called Alchemy by Rory Sutherland. He's the deputy chairman of Ogilvy, which is one of the big marketing agencies. And he talks a lot about that. And he kind of, says there's too many engineers and too many MBAs. I am an MBA that think logically and think that everything has to have a plan. But life isn't linear necessarily. Things don't happen over time consistently. And what makes sense doesn't always work. And what works doesn't always make sense. And we need to be more open to adapting to what makes sense in different contexts, I think is the biggest thing. Great book. I highly recommend it to everybody. One that I've given away to a bunch of people. And I think it jives very well with what you have been talking about and some of the examples you've been giving of understanding that, your plan is great, but it might not work. And you need to be open to how to adapt it, to tropicalize it, to localize it and customize it.
Yes, and you become more resourceful. If you can adapt, you become, as a person, as a professional, become more resourceful. So you are working with your brain, new connections, new synapses. And if you understand the people are meeting and making your offer, for instance, business offer, so it's a step to understand the market. You start working with the people in front of you, but then you understand this larger markets that you are targeting to in different ways.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. But my question was going to be, and it actually goes very well with what we've been talking about, as we mentioned strategies, what are some strategies that companies have used to bridge this cross-cultural gap that you've seen that have been really successful? And maybe what are some that have made sense logically, at least to them, and haven't been as successful? So can you talk a little bit about how companies approach this and what you've seen that's been both successful and unsuccessful?
One thing that works make companies more successful, that are good choices, is to offer cultural trainings because they work. You become more knowledgeable, you become more flexible, and then you can enjoy the experience. So it's a fact. And most companies don't invest in cultural training. The culture is not included in their business plan. And you have to include that. You have to budget. And so this, when it's offered, you see that it works, it helps people. And I think that one good strategy is to offer the cultural trainings at least to the leaders. Because if leaders they have this cultural awareness or flexibility or skill, they can pass on or pass this knowledge along to the teams. So in a way, they will be bridging, they'll be teaching, or they'll be the channels where this knowledge is going to be shared. So I think this is one good strategy. And also, I think a good strategy companies can use is to choose the right people for international postings or for international jobs, even if you don't move. Because language is not enough. Speaking foreign language is not enough. Language fluency is not enough. You need flexibility, you need curiosity. And I think no matter where you go, you need to pick the right people because I've seen, Isaac, top guys, very prepared people come to Brazil like CEOs, and then because of the lack of local knowledge or cultural knowledge, they were sent back home overnight. I have seen Germans opening a brand new office downtown here, and then after a while, they closed the office and went back home. I have seen clients coming and scheduling meetings with me. And the next week, I went to the company. They were not in Brazil anymore. They quit. Okay. Or they were sent back. So this is, you have to pick the right people and prepare those people.
I think that's right. I think that it's a big investment from the people and from the company to send somebody. And if they're not prepared and they don't have the resources they need, then it's a waste of resources.
Yeah, a waste of energy, a waste of time, a waste of money. So the conclusion is that it saves your time. If you have this cultural knowledge, you're saving everyone's time. You can be successful earlier in less time. And the things that you said, everything is rational. So you have a plan, you have the resources, you make time. So everything is rational. But when you go abroad, being rational is not enough. You have to include emotions because you know about neuroscience, we know the power and the place or the importance of emotions, especially coming to Brazil or working with Brazilians. You have to include emotions. Remember the lady I said that she was receiving two visitors. A Brazilian would say, "Oh, welcome," and maybe hug them. Not at the beginning of the visit, but at the end of the day, people would hug. But you know, she had to deal with her emotions, use the emotions in the right way, process the emotions. So vice versa. So you have to budget time for building the relationship, the right relationship. For example, we haven't talked about the French. Brazilians have a hard time working with French people because they say, for example, a Brazilian lawyer, a lady, she had this new boss, big company, and whenever she went there and showed him the solutions she had thought of, she had planned, he would say, "Why? But why?" She felt that he thought she was incompetent, always asking why. And then she went to human resources and said she wanted to quit. She didn't feel confident. She was losing her confidence. But that's powerful. That's a real example.
Right. And he was probably just trying to get her to explain the context of her decision, not trying to be mean, but just trying to go deeper. But the cultural barrier was there.
Isaac, it's a French thing. They always want to know the why. It's not about the person. One thing that Brazilians have to learn, it's not personal. Remember the emotions. So the way I think, the way I process it, remember the echoes of the past. France is the land of literature, philosophy, psychoanalysis. So they're always looking for the why. Does it make sense? So, and once she understood that, she was comfortable with his voice.
That's great. You have to understand where somebody's sitting to understand what they mean by those expressions, right? Something that the word why can be challenging or it can be supportive at the same time, depending on understanding the context of where it's coming from. And those are great examples. And I think emotion is another thing my wife likes to say that Brazilians have blood in their veins. It's sangue na veia. which is the strong emotions that go on both sides. So great examples. I know that the podcast has generally been about this, but what does the expression Brazil is not for beginners mean to you?
My experience along the years, I have heard again and again people saying, "Oh, I love living here, especially Rio de Janeiro. It's easy to live here. It's very enjoyable. I love living here. It's easy to live, but difficult to work." So I think the idea behind the context of our conversation is that you have to do your homework. I remember an American guy, great guy. He said that when he was offered the opportunity to come to Rio, and he had never come here before, but he thought Rio de Janeiro, he thought of the beaches, and then he said yes immediately. But when he arrived here, it was much more about Rio that he didn't know, he was not prepared for. This guy said, "I went to Brazil, but I hadn't done my homework." So you have to do your homework. And the cultural preparation, that's necessary.
No, I can tell you on my end that I first moved to Brazil because I was, working in finance in New York, and I got off the subway at 6:15 in the morning and stepped in a slush puddle, and I said, "I'm married to a woman from Rio. I could be living in a tropical country right now. What am I doing?" And that kind of started my whole process of moving down here. So, Rio is way more complex. It is very different visiting it for 2 weeks than living there full time. I have to say, I think I like living more in Sao Paulo than I like living in Rio. Rio is a place to visit for me. But yeah, you got to do your homework. That's the idea. I like that a lot. Are there any, and again, you've given us plenty of examples, but I don't know if there's anything in specific. I always like to ask my guests at the end. Are there any expressions or habits or things that stand out to you that foreigners struggle with or that they don't understand? So you just gave the example earlier about saying somebody's name. And I don't think I've said your name once since the beginning, Denise, but you've said my name a number of times and I've noted it because you pointed it out. But are there any expressions or habits that you'd really highlight for folks?
Yes, it's something so simple. It sounds like a joke, and maybe no one else will tell you this. Not an expression, but a word, very simple word that you have to be aware of in Rio de Janeiro. In Brazil, is the word yes. Because yes, maybe, or it's usually a hidden no. Remember the question, the matter of communication, and that we are indirect. It's very difficult for us to be direct and say no. So once, if you are working with Brazilians, you'd better confirm, restate, say the same thing in different ways so that you create the space and the trust. If I see that Americans asking me again, say, "Oh, he's really into, I can trust him," I'm telling the truth. No, I can't do it. No, this deadline doesn't work for me. But you have until we get to know each other and I can be more direct with you. So I need this, Brazilians need this effort. So there is a joke. Let me see if I remember the joke. They say that in Brazil, if someone says yes, it probably means maybe. If they say maybe, it's probably a no. And if they say no, he's not Brazilian. So the word that you have to be aware of is yes. And if there is a habit, I have something I think probably very special and very practical. So, for example, Americans are very good at giving constructive, let's call it constructive feedback. Something is not working, you just say it because you save people's time, you're honest, you are willing to help people. I have seen the guys at the oil on the oil rig. It was fantastic. They were very direct, but they were always willing to work as a team. So, but with Brazil, it's just the other way around. We are very good and we expect to receive positive feedback. So if there is a new habit that works here is giving loads of positive feedback. So if I give positive feedback, I'm telling you what works, what you're doing that I like. So I'm informing you about what works for both of, for me that will make our work more successful or better, easier, more effective. So keep that in mind. And I am only telling you this, Isaac, because my clients say, "Denise, I'm impressed. Every little thing, big or small, but especially every small thing that's working, Brazilians talk about."
Yeah, that's a great feedback. I don't know if I've ever thought about it that way. That's really a nice way to think about the work environment and how Brazilians like to give feedback in a different way. I'm going to still have to digest that one a little bit. But Denise, thank you so much for joining me. I think we could go on for another hour. I really like your stories and your anecdotes. It's a pleasure to chat with you as always. How can listeners reach you if they want to learn more about these topics, if they're interested in learning about your coaching, and if they might be able to engage with you? What are the best ways that people can find you?
They can reach me on LinkedIn. My name is Denise Coronha Lima, or my website, www.riototalbrasil.com.br, or my email, which is riototal at riototalbrasil.com.br.
Great. Well, Denise, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you coming on. I really do love our chats. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Please do reach out to Denise. She is a fantastic coach and mentor and can really help your organization and you as you think about Brazil. Thank you again. Thanks again for joining us. This podcast was hosted by me, Isaac Matzner. It was produced and edited by Maria Filmes. You can find more episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube, as well as on our Substack page. We do love feedback, so please feel free to reach out to us on social media or via email at Brazil, the number 4, beginners@gmail.com.